This podcast has bad words.
Wait, is the pen drop? Is that like when a comedian drops the mic? Is that like the equivalent when like for a writer?
The far less dramatic.
You just like write something and drop your pen. Like,
Do you think Sean does a typewriter drop?
Like the Murder, She Wrote, like cha-ching, and that's your...
That's a perfect place to start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
and I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are the Minimalists.
Today we're going to talk about tribes. We're going to talk about picking sides. Whose side are you on, Ryan?
I'm on your side, Josh.
That's the right answer.
As long as you're on my side.
We're going to talk about finding common ground with people who have different beliefs with today's guest. My friend, comedian, and political podcaster Jamie Kilstein is here. Jamie, thank you for being here.
Hi,
man.
everybody. I'm so excited about this.
Awesome, man.
So Jamie, we met on Twitter, like
Yep.
All good relationships start.
Yep.
Well, at least in the 21st century, that's where all good relationships start.
I've met more awesome people on Twitter than anywhere else.
I hate Twitter and social media with all of my being, and like have told agents when they're like, what's your goal in life and like in Hollywood? I'm like, my goal is to get famous enough to get off social media forever, which agents don't want to hear, so don't do that. But at the same time, I have met like my best friends through Twitter. 'Cause,
Totally.
yeah, if there's someone you admire, you can reach out and like become homies. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So
it's
today
pretty
we're going to
cool.
talk about finding common ground, and I think one of the problems with social media is people are just lobbing grenades at each other because like, oh, we don't have common ground. I'm going to have to destroy you if I disagree with you. And we want to do the opposite today. We want to help people find some common ground. So we've got some questions here today. Let's start with Morgan in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Right now I'm struggling with a tiny predicament. I hate the snow, and I have been in Salt Lake City my entire life. I'm 24 years old, so that's 24 years of snow. And I recently went to Phoenix and fell in love with the city, brought my boyfriend with me, and he was kind of indifferent. And I'm struggling because I don't want to like leave him behind to start over, but I don't know how to handle the snow another year, another winter. And I just can't seem to get him on board with the Arizona idea. So how do you handle a scenario where you're ready to like jump in both feet and your partner is hesitant?
Minimize them. Next question.
I have so many thoughts on this. I feel like there's got to be, I mean, I would love to ask her how the relationship is otherwise, because she sort of sounded ready to go when she was like, man, I hate the snow. I'm like ready to leave. Like her voice dropped in a kind of whisper. And I feel like if you're that willing to leave your boyfriend or your partner behind over like the weather, there may be something else to examine there. I think that I am moving to Arizona tomorrow. I have only lived in New York City and Los Angeles because of my career. Ever since I started visiting Arizona, much like her, something magical has happened. I don't honk my horn. I'm not on my phone as much. I'm not driving as fast. I'm not constantly feeling judged. And the weather I get too. In New York, New York's miserable besides the weather. New York, when I moved to LA and people were like so mean about LA, like all my New York friends were like, yeah, they're just fake happy. And then I moved out here and I'm like, no, they're happy because it's amazing and because
Right.
it's sunny and because everyone's positive and because, you know, a homeless guy didn't take a shit in your backpack on the subway and then you get back to your apartment and one of your 15 mean roommates took a shit in your other backpack. Like it is, I was so happy to be here. LA was my upgrade from New York and saved me from legit depression. And Arizona is kind of my upgrade from LA, or my minimizing, I should say. I went New York, LA, Arizona, which you guys have a lot to do with what gave me the confidence to do that. So
Oh, man.
I don't want her to think that, because she's probably thinking that she's a bad person right now, where am I willing to leave this guy behind because I don't like the snow? But she also sounded emphatic that it's probably not just the snow, and also seasonal depression is real. I used to get very depressed in the winter over New York, and And I'm in a situation now, man, where I just met this girl who's coming to Arizona with me, and without hesitation, like, we fell in love. We gave each other confidence. We built each other up, and she quit her job, and she told her parents she's moving to Arizona with this guy she just met. I flew down. I met her parents. It's the best relationship I've ever been in, and we're doing this dramatic move together, you know? If it would be one thing if he, you know, his job, if he's a snow shoveler in Utah and like that's his passion and she's taking him away from that. But I don't know, man. I mean, if he knows that it is affecting your mental health and there's nothing, you know, maybe his family's there, we don't know, right?
Yeah.
But if there's nothing pulling, it would be cool if he was supportive. Or if he doesn't like Phoenix, which, by the way, I don't like Phoenix and I'm moving to Arizona, check out other places in Arizona, because there are doper, quieter places that are still an hour, 2 hours away from Phoenix.
You're going to Tucson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tucson's great, man.
It's incredible.
I love that city.
It's like pre-South by Southwest Austin. Everyone's just like friendly. When they were like, oh, this is the bar district. I don't drink, so I was like, oh, I don't want to check that out. But there were like 18 bookstores like on the like party block.
Yeah.
Like made for me. And it's an hour and a half outside of Phoenix. So when my friends and bands are playing in Phoenix, you can just drive up. So maybe that's the solution. But I would talk to him, be super open, tell him why it's important to you. Don't do that thing couples do sometimes where you just want them to kind of read your mind, where you're like, we should move to Phoenix. And he's like, I don't really like Phoenix. It's like, why don't you support me? It's like, well, because you're not telling him how important it is to you. And then take it from there. That's kind of my first instinct.
No, I think I definitely would like to know more information about the relationship, because I agree there was some hesitation in her voice with the relationship in general.
Yes.
And the moving to Phoenix it seems like a symptom of something maybe more that's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally agree. Like, my biggest recommendation would be like, yes, just to echo what you said, like, really get clear with him. Like, hey, I need this to happen in my life in order for me to be happy. Yeah. Like, I want you to be happy. I know you want me to be happy. So I'm going to need some type of support. So if it's not Tucson, Arizona, if it's not, you know, Flagstaff, Arizona, that's this place in Arizona, right?
Yep.
Like, you know, ask him if there's some warm weather state that he would be willing to consider. I mean, this is where the common ground comes in, right?
Yeah. For me, I know when we were living in Missoula, I was done. I was a lot like Morgan. I was so done with the snow. Like, I spent the first like 36 plus years of my life committed to winter. Growing up in Dayton, Ohio, right? And the snow there, and by the way, the crazy humid summers there. And I really like Dayton. I like everything about Dayton except the weather. Yeah. And leaving there, we went to Missoula. We actually we're supposed to be in Montana for 4 months, but we both met our significant others there. It ended up being much longer. But in order to leave, because there are complications, right?
Totally.
Like you said, there might be family, there might be jobs, there might be circumstances that tether you to a place or root you to a place.
Or in your case, Bex had a kid there.
Yeah. And so when I met Bex, you know, she had Ella. Ella was 1 when I met Bex. Yeah. And so you have to take all of these things into consideration. And then the question is, okay, I can't do it right now. This isn't about like, well, we need to pack up everything immediately and run away, because you don't want to run away from the place you're at. You want to be running to the place you're going.
Yes, you want to be excited about it. First of all, Phoenix is too, like, the reason I think there's a problem with the relationship is Phoenix is like too shitty to throw away a good relationship. You know what I mean? Like, and I love Arizona. It would be one thing if she was going to like Maui or something like that. But if she's just like, it's between my husband and Des Moines, I'd be like, it's probably your husband, dude. Like, but yeah, I am
to be clear, real quick, I would much rather live in Des Moines or Phoenix than Maui, personally.
Oh, yeah. All right. Fair. I'm sorry to all the Des Moines. And I told you I would be apologizing 5 minutes into this podcast. But we are so excited. So my girlfriend and I were literally like, we should think about moving out of LA next year. And then we just kept getting more excited. And we're like, we should go when our lease is up in August. And then we were like, then we went to Tucson and we were like, we should go in July and pay double rent, which is what we're doing. And then it got to the point where we were like, what's the earliest we can move in? And we're going to like pay an extra week to leave the last week of June, right? It's
awesome.
Because we're excited. And you want to be with someone where the last panel of Calvin and Hobbes is like my favorite piece of literature, where it's essentially like, let's go on an adventure together. And that's what you want in a partner. And like I said, maybe it's not Phoenix. If you just need to get away from the snow, it's not Phoenix. It doesn't have to be Phoenix.
Right,
you know,
absolutely.
It can be so many other places. But definitely think about the relationship and don't stay in a resentful relationship. It's so dangerous, you know?
Yeah,
I think you want to end up in a place where you're not resenting the other person, and the same is also true for your boyfriend, Morgan. You don't want to drag him to Phoenix,
Right.
and now he's going to resent the relationship, because that puts you in an odd predicament where you feel now obligated to sort of pacify or make up for it in some way. I love the idea, Jamie, of adventure and finding someone that you can adventure with, and realizing that each chapter is just that. You want to leave Salt Lake City for you right now, which is definitely one of my top 5 favorite cities. I really like Salt Lake City, and you're talking about going to another place. Tucson is top 3 favorite cities for me. I really enjoy both places, but there's a reason that you want to leave. There's a reason that you want to go right now, but also realize that in dragging him to another state, man, you can create this dissident that will have ripple effects from here on out, and so you better have a plan in place.
Yeah, and last thing for me, which is, it would be better to go on an adventure to discover yourself in a city that you've fallen in love with, like Phoenix, than to have a mediocre relationship in a new city to try to save that relationship, right? If you think Phoenix is going to save your relationship, it's just going to be a little warmer when you fight, as opposed to, it is equally an adventure to go to rediscover who you are, to find the things you love, to start again in a new city. You know, I know even if me and my girlfriend broke up in Tucson, both of our lives are better for this adventure. She got to leave this 9-to-5 that she never thought she could get out of. She has this new confidence and realizes, like, she's artistic. Like, I get to create, not because I'm in front of a bunch of industry in Los Angeles or because I want to get onto TV, but because I love the art of stand-up comedy, and I get to be in nature instead of being in New York City or Los Angeles. Like, both of us are going to come out no matter what happens. I hope we get married. I hope we have a family, but we're also entering into a situation where no matter what, both of us we're moving forward, like you talked about.
And like I said earlier, this is a chapter, and breakups aren't necessarily a bad thing. We did a whole podcast episode with Nate Green about breakups.
I heard that.
and he just got out of this 10-year relationship, and what you learn from that is you can appreciate those months, days, years, whatever, together, and you can move on from the thing. You can graduate from a relationship and be a better person because of it, and also be a better partner for future partners as a result. So breakups aren't inherently a bad thing. In our culture, we've treated them that way.
Oh, yeah.
We say, well, we got into one fight, and now I hate you, and it's retroactive to everything that we've ever done, and I want to pretend this relationship never happened.
Yeah.
What a terrible way to look at a relationship.
That was like I gave you notes on my divorce. You just read like the press blurb of my marriage.
Oh, right.
yeah. That's what happened, where you have 10, 12 years together, and suddenly it's like we hate each other now? Like, that's garbage. Like, maybe we got into a fight. Maybe, like, we definitely weren't right for each other. Maybe whatever. But, like, it's a bummer to not be able to go back and appreciate, like, the good stuff that happened. Because good stuff always happens.
The opposite of nostalgia, because nostalgia, like, paints everything with rose-colored glasses.
Right.
Like, oh, everything was great about that. I miss it. I want to go back. Yeah. But you don't think about, like, oh yeah, there was a lot of pain and discomfort or whatever, and so the opposite of nostalgia would be like, everything was terrible, nothing was good about this.
What's a defense mechanism? Like, she'll do that with, if she moves out of Salt Lake, which I really hope you do. She'll do. I did that with New York until I went back. I literally went back to visit New York 3 months ago, and I was like, why didn't anyone say this city's incredible? This is like an amazing. I'm like looking at buildings. I lived there for like my whole life, and I'm just suddenly like, this is magic. I'm walking through New York. I went through Times Square, which I always avoided when I lived there. And it's because if you asked me what I hated about New York 5 years ago, I would have said, oh, it's too crowded, everyone's mean, blah, blah, blah. The real answer is my ex-wife, my ex-girlfriend. I felt like a failure. I dropped the ball, like, with comedy. Like, I ruined this friendship. It was just personal. Like,
it's psychological residue is what my therapist calls it.
Yeah, and I do the same thing with comedy. Like, when I quit comedy before I came back to it, instead of just being like, man, I really appreciate comedy as an art, I was like, fuck comedy, fuck comedians. Like, you know, when Robin died, like, he was one of my best friends. I'm like, comedy, like, took Robin Williams, like, and I just hated it And only recently have I started rewatching stand-up, and I'm like, no, I love stand-up. I felt like a failure, so I just wanted to burn everything down behind me. And the only way to grow is to learn from everything behind you, and then again use that to propel you forward.
Yeah. I like what you did with Bex, Josh. Like when you kind of decided you were like going to graduate from Missoula, you didn't give her an ultimatum like, I'm leaving next week and you can either come with me or not. I mean, it was like,
how can we figure this out together?
Right. And you compromised, because if it was up to you and if it was just you probably would have left that week.
Immediately, yeah.
Right.
Well, I actually had Elise in my inbox on our first date, so I was ready to come
Whoa.
here. And I actually had to call the landlord, and I said, hey, look, some things have changed. I'm going to stick around in Missoula for a little bit. Really sorry. Like, I had a place to live and everything in L.A. the week that I met Bex, but I'm like, there's something here.
That's so romantic. I like that a lot.
Let me figure this out. But to your point, Ryan, yeah, I didn't just say, well, I'm going to move and you need to come too. It's like, hey, this is something that's important to me. Is there a way that we can figure this out together? And knowing that it wasn't going to be easy, and there were all these other complications that rooted her to Missoula, but we had to find a way to make it work. And it took an additional, 2.5 years to make that work before we were able to exit. So I had to deal with the snow and the long winters a little bit longer, but was she worth it? Yes.
Yeah.
And Morgan, is your boyfriend worth it?
Yeah.
Only you can determine that.
Yeah, I mean, really what I think that story says is like, Morgan, if you want your boyfriend to bend a little bit, like you're going to have to also bend a little bit.
Yeah.
Like how long did it was a year. It wasn't a year after you kind of, like when you had that lease in your inbox from that day.
2.5 years.
It was 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So you stayed in Missoula for 2.5 years but that was your compromise.
Just so she doesn't get scared by what you're saying, I think she sounds like she needs to go now, but I think what you're saying is look for that compromise.
Right.
Like, it doesn't mean you have to stay another winter if you mentally can't take another winter.
Of course.
But like, she sounds like she does what I do, where she went to a place and was suddenly like, this is the place that's going to solve all my problems. Like, oh my God. And then she looks and the boyfriend isn't as excited, and she just feels like a stab to the heart, where it's like, now's the time, but you still got a couple months before winter. Like, hey, let's visit some other places.
Yeah.
Let's, do this. So maybe you're not stuck there for 2.5 years, but if you could do 2.5 years, she can visit a couple other cities.
Sure. Yeah.
You're probably one conversation away from solving this. Now, solving it can mean one of two different directions, right? But you're probably one important, difficult conversation away from solving this. Morgan, I'd love to give you a copy of our book, Minimalism. It's the first book Ryan and I ever wrote, but it's about the 5 foundational values in our lives. And there's one chapter in there about relationships and the nuances of relationships.
It's called Get the Fuck Out of Salt Lake City.
Hey, man, Utah Jazz are there. That's my basketball team.
Nice.
Anyway, so Sean, if you could reach out to Morgan and give her the audiobook version of Minimalism. It's Minimalism, Live a Meaningful Life is the full title. But if you like our podcast, you will enjoy the audiobook version of Minimalism. Or if you want the book or the ebook, we'll be happy to send those to you as well. Ryan, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It is time for our lightning round, where we answer questions from social media.
Indeed, we do. We are at The Minimalists on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And Jamie Kilstein is at Jamie Kilstein on Twitter. I think at the Jamie Kilstein on Instagram.
Yes, follow me.
And
validate.
It's funny. I heard you talking about the validation on Twitter, how you're constantly refreshing. And it's like, I get caught in that sometimes too, man. Like, I had made this comment on, like, yesterday it happened. I was responding to something that... Oh no, it's totally the comedian slipping my mind. But anyway, he said something about
Jamie Kilstein.
Yeah, right.
Hilarious comedian.
Hilarious
Jamie
comedian.
Kilstein.
That's the other hilarious comedian. No, he said something about jean shorts and how people in jean shorts are like bound to walk slow, and I was like, yeah, because like they can't help but strut with such fashion or something. And I started getting all these likes, and I found myself like refreshing, like how many more likes did I get this hour? How many more likes did I get in the last 2 hours?
And by the way, that to tie it to what Joshua was saying in the beginning of the episode, that's one of the main reasons we are screaming at people with different political points of views on Twitter. I was doing that when I was miserable, and when I was in a relationship that was failing, and when I was in a city that I didn't like, because I would wake up every day. If you get home and you tweet like, I really love the trailer for Lion King, no one gives a shit except for someone who's going to be like, Lion King's problematic. And you're like, well, I don't know why. But if you tweet hatred or vitriol, or if you attack someone, or if you attack, like, I'm still pretty liberal, but if I attack someone who I don't think is as liberal, and then it's infighting, or you go to like shame someone, that's when your likes and favorites start to bounce up. So that's what got me addicted to it. And I think that's why all we're doing is calling each other Marxists and Nazis, because that's what gets the validation. That's what gets your tribe to kind of team up and start retweeting and start favoriting. So now you have this adrenaline of I'm in a political battle, but you're also getting the dopamine hits from the refreshing.
Wow, dude, I've been recently, for some reason, these stories have been popping up on my YouTube feed. So I know there's an algorithm. There's something I'm looking at that's suggesting these videos, but it's these like self-sabotaging stories of these social media or YouTube influencers who had it all go to their head. So then they started like just saying crazy, like this one guy was like, I am the Antichrist, like
FouseyTube. You remember him, Jordan? No.
FouseyTube, but
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
had like 10 million followers and like had an internet breakdown.
right. So I mean,
Yeah.
but that is exactly one of the stories that pops up in my feed. I mean, I haven't heard of FouseyTube specifically, but that arc is like a very common thing where because you want the validation and you get so hooked on the dopamine that it truly makes you have a mental breakdown or changes your mentality.
And you don't need friends in real life because you have them online, because you're getting the likes. And not just friends, but now celebrities are retweeting me when I call this politician an asshole or whatever. And that's a much bigger deal. So then you start to take down your contact with people on the outside and your real relationships. I've said this before, but I would literally... Someone could be like, I was like, the term virtue signaling is used by a lot of extremists, but it was what I was doing, where someone could be like, hey, Jamie, your mom's on the phone and needs to talk to you. And I would be like, tell her I can't talk. I'm tweeting about feminism. You know what I mean? Like, I was ignoring people in my real life to just put out this image of being this like amazing guy online, and it becomes addicting. And I really do think that is a huge part of why we're all screaming at each other on the internet.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. I just remember who the comedian was. It was Bill Burr. That's who it was. He said something about it. Anyway, all right. So
he said some funny things about our documentary.
Did he?
Yeah.
What did he say?
Yeah, it was. It's you go to the Making Minimalism video on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
He was talking about, I get it. Get rid of your stuff. You'll be happy. Like,
That's a really good Bill Burr. Yeah.
It's funny. I've had people come up and say that at our events where they're like, aren't you really just saying like focus on what's important to you and get rid of your stuff and not focus on things? I'm like, yeah. They were like, well, what's up with this event? I'm like, you can't really just tweet that and add value to people's lives.
Or like, oh, that's so profound.
Right. And our work is done.
That's actually why I really like Jamie's podcast, is because he creates nuance where it's not like he does a podcast for the tribalists. I think that's how you identify it.
It's one of the ways.
And so like he is like center left, used to be really far left and realized like the wrongness of his ways, but you don't correct that by swinging all the way to the right,
which was tempting, by the way. Like when I lost a lot of the far left audience, I literally had a book deal offer and I lost all my money. And I was sleeping on a couch, and I had a book deal offer to be that guy that's like, why I left the left and the right is right. And I'd have my own Fox News special, and it would be great. And I spent nights on YouTube being like, all right, maybe I'll like this Ben Shapiro guy. And I'm like, no, not really. And
but you also recognize that you can agree with some of the things he says without dismissing him
exactly.
altogether.
And that's what I'm trying to do. There are so many issues that if we actually talk to each other, even the most contentious political issues, you will find things you agree on. And I have just lived a better life. People say if you talk to the other side, you're like selling out. But aren't you going to lead a better, more fulfilling life not thinking that we're like surrounded by Nazis if we're not surrounded by Nazis? I mean, I went to Texas to meet my girlfriend's parents the other week, and they are conservative, worked in oil, everything that the old Jamie who interviewed Noam Chomsky 3 times would have been like, we're throwing down, time to bring my picket sign to dinner. But all I cared about this time, I didn't care about their politics. All I cared about is that my girlfriend loves them more than life itself, and that they love and support her no matter what she's doing.
It's like, oh my God, I can find common ground with people who have different beliefs from me.
And by the way, when we agreed on the fact that, hey, we all love Emma, when that was the agreement we came up with, we talked about guns, we talked about religion, we talked about gay rights, we talked about everything you're not supposed to talk about at the dinner table, let alone the dinner table on day one of you meeting your girlfriend's parents when you look like I do and covered in tattoos. Already, I'm like starting at a bit of a downfall. And the mom was texting me, I love you, within 2 days because we connected that hard on the those really hard issues because we both accepted that we have the same values. And as long as you have the same values, now we can talk about that we disagree on how to get to those values. But instead of being like, oh, you don't believe in universal health care, you want kids to die, or you're not pro-choice, like you hate women, like, but finding out like, why do you believe these things? Then you can actually come up with solutions.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. All right, let's try to answer these questions in less than 140 characters.
Jesus Christ.
Sean puts the our quotes in the show notes. You can also find them at minimalmaxims.com. He actually just makes it something pithy that is tweetable. We can ramble on a little bit.
Yeah, you just ramble, and then Sean will make it look pretty.
Great.
All right, our first question is from Amanda. How can I find common ground with people who have different beliefs, such as how to raise your kids? I'm glad she didn't use like another belief, like, you know, something that was truly divisive. Like this is, I feel like this is a very nice, like.
Well, we do have a question about abortion later, so we'll get to that.
Great.
But here's my pithy answer for you. Stand your ground even if you can't find common ground. And really what I'm saying there is don't compromise your values. You can change your beliefs. Beliefs are malleable, and they should be. Otherwise, it becomes dogma, and that's really dangerous. We talked about that on last week's episode. But also listen to the people who have different beliefs, because they might even change your mind. I'm not talking about a full 180, but they might make you pivot 5 degrees. And that 5-degree shift, as Jamie figured out when he decided that, you know, maybe these beliefs, maybe I'm too tethered to them. I'm clinging to them too tightly. I don't need to let go of all of them, but I need to loosen my grip a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know how to give a pithy answer to this, so I'll say there's no I in team. That's my pithy answer. And then
Perfect.
My actual
Is that an original quote?
yeah, that was all
There's
me.
no I in team, Jamie Kilstein.
The Jamie Kilstein podcast.com. I'm excited to answer the abortion, because I think there's an answer to even the most controversial.
Okay, we'll get to that. But let's talk about raising kids.
I think raising kids is actually like equally as personal, right? Like if someone told me how to raise my kids, you want to get very, very defensive. What I would say, I totally agree with you, which is you can learn from everybody. You can learn from the people you totally disagree with. It's Bruce Lee, be like water, right? Like the reason Bruce Lee became one of the best martial artists is because he didn't stick to I'm just going to be a karate guy or a jiu-jitsu guy or a Muay Thai guy or a boxing guy. He took the best from each art. I think it was like he said, like, use what's useful, disregard what's useless, or something like that. And he took the best from each art. And this is how we have modern mixed martial arts as well. Use that and threw away the stuff he didn't like, right? So there's probably something you can learn from even the people who you most vehemently disagree with on raising your kids. But like you said, I mean, it's your kids. You're going to know. As long as you're not being stubborn and you're not ignoring that person's opinion for something that has to do with your own ego, where you're like, these are my fucking kids and I know how to raise them, and if I want to let them sit in a hot car with the windows up, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, well, that's not good. But at the same time, you know, see if there's anything to learn from it. Then you can just kind of move on. But if you have a friend who is constantly ridiculing you, if that's what inspired her tweet, where she has someone or a relative or a sister or someone who just every time you see them, you know, you really should be doing this with your kids, you really should be doing this. Maybe that person is like a shitty person, and you don't need to have them in your life.
Love them from a distance.
Yeah, and they're projecting their own stuff on you. But if it's well-intentioned advice and it's not coming in a passive-aggressive or mean way, see if there's anything to take from it, and then be like, thank you for your comments, your thoughts and comments, and then just move on.
That's exactly it, man. I mean, my short answer is showing respect is the best way to avoid confrontation. So, yeah, if someone wants to give you advice on your kids and you don't want to hear it, that's exactly what you do.
I just go, cool, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the advice. I appreciate it, because that's really, what do we want out of our relationships, romantic or friendships, man? Like, we want to show respect. We want to be respected. Like, that's how you're going to get along with people, even though you have different beliefs.
Yeah.
All right, our next question is from Nick. Why do I find it so difficult to find common ground with certain people? No matter how open-minded and considerate I try to be, it feels impossible. Is my problem a lack of willingness to learn something new? Is it close-mindedness?
Well, my pithy answer is this, and we can unpack it a little bit. Because the question is, hey, am I being closed-minded? And I think this is a spectrum, right? So an open mind is an asset. A porous mind is a liability. You know, like this glass right here. it works really well because there is a top and I can sip out of it. If it was completely closed, it would just be a vessel of trapped water. If there was a hole in the bottom or on the side or a bunch of holes throughout, then it wouldn't serve any purpose at all, right? And I think the same is true with the open mind, closed minded thing. And Jamie, with you had a relatively closed mind when you were podcasting before, right?
For sure.
And this is something that you've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, my pithy answer is when God closes a door, he opens a window. That's also trademark Jamie Kilstein. And yeah, totally. I mean, a lot of times we see this on Twitter when like someone's Twitter bio is like contrarian. And you're just like, if that's the thing you're going to own is like, I'm going to constantly shit on your ideas and disagree. It's like, are you doing that for the right reasons, right? So the person who wrote in, self-aware enough to ask if I'm closed-minded. Yeah. Great first step. Mm-hmm. Like that person is definitely savable.
Totally
but
agree.
You have to, have you become addicted to just being the guy that goes, but actually, you know what I mean? Or like, here's why, because that was something, again, on the left that happened where anytime someone liked something, you know, you would have to tell them why they're wrong or why, you know, you could literally tweet like, loved Crazy Rich Asians. Everyone loved Crazy Rich Asians, but me, old Jamie and me friends were like, oh, so all Asians are crazy? And like, what about like, what kind of Asians are they? Like, are there trans Asians? And you just like find ways just to attack and be like, I am better than you. If that's why you're constantly disagreeing, you shouldn't ever be having conversations just to prove you're right. I mean, that's the best relationship advice I can give too. If both of your goals are to become better people and save the relationship instead of I want to win this fight, then you should be psyched to apologize. You should be psyched to figure out, to realize you're wrong, you know? I mean, that's what happens now. When you're having these political arguments, so many times you're not actually hearing what the person's saying. You're just lock and loading your talking point that your team told you about. And a lot of times you couldn't even go into depth about your talking point. You just go, I know when this person says that, you know, we should have college for all, I'm supposed to say, how do you pay for that? But neither of you are actually looking at, you know, maybe the liberal's not looking at how do we pay for that. Maybe the conservative's not looking at, you know, maybe we should have free education, even if we don't know how to do it right now. Like, how can we talk about this? How can we have a conversation? So if you are constantly trying to disagree with someone to prove that you are smarter or that you're more well-read, or you think you're going to, like, you know, help this poor, hapless victim who doesn't know that day's talking points from CNN or from The Intercept or from the National Review or whatever side you're on, no good. You should go into conversations excited to learn, excited to change your mind, excited to evolve. We view the term flip-flopper as such a negative thing, when in reality, to me, like, changing your mind is great. That's one of like the key steps to evolution, to moving on. And yeah, I used to do that all the time because I assumed, to me, being liberal was I want more people to have rights, which also means that I assume that all Republicans don't. And there's probably about half of my audience, even though I'm still very liberal, who are conservatives. And we got one yesterday. A dude on Patreon is giving us $50 a month, which is insane. Wow. And he wrote, I don't agree with anything you say. It was hysterical. His email, anything. And he goes, and I don't want you to pander to me. No matter how much you piss me off, I am still going to give you this money for at least a year, he said, which is $500 to listen to someone who politically enrages you. Yeah. And he goes, because I like the way you're doing it. And I like that you're not name calling. And so that to me was the greatest compliment I've ever gotten, as opposed to the years where I had people in my own echo chamber being like, I agree with the thing you said, so keep saying it. And then I would have to keep saying it and keep saying it. My life is so much richer reading people I disagree, talking people I disagree with, and sometimes changing my mind, and sometimes being like, oh, still disagree, but like, you're a dope person, let's be friends.
You're making room for other people's mistakes and nuances, and I think if we can do that, if we make room, that is the best place to approach any discussion or place from which we disagree.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. My pithy answer is approaching opinions from multiple sides makes it easier to respect those we disagree with. And again, like, people just want to know that you see where they're coming from. So like, if you can take a moment to put yourself in someone's shoes and like see why they have that opposing, that complete opposite belief or that complete opposite value, like, that's going to help you get closer to having some meaningful conversations. Like, I'm reading this book right now. I forget the guy's name. I know his last name is Eisenstein, but it's called Climate Change, A New Story. And like, the dude is he basically approaches it with like, hey, if you're a climate denier, you're on the wrong side. Or if you're a climate change denier, you're on the wrong side. If you use the term climate change denier, you're on the wrong side. Like, he takes this very centered approach. And what he does in the book is he goes through all of the skeptical information when it comes to climate change. He goes through all the scientific data that supports, the climate change with the CO2. And it's a really rich book on how to look at the environment. And I'll tell you, like, the far left side when it comes to the environment, like, they're off a little bit. And on the far right side, they're off a little bit. And he goes through both sides. And that, I think, is what is going to create the meaningful outcomes.
Oh, dude, check this out. So I literally just talked about this on today's podcast, where I talked to an old comedian friend of mine who's conservative, and we stopped talking. And
Nick DiPaolo.
It was Nick DiPaolo. Yeah, it was Dennis Miller. And we stopped talking, and he gave me my first stage time in New Jersey. So we have this phone call, and I just randomly DM'd him and was just like, hey man, I probably said some shitty things to you when I was like a liberal asshole. I'm really sorry. And he's like, can I call you? And we had the greatest conversation about comedy, about how, about censorship nowadays, about all this stuff. And we started talking about climate change. And he goes, I hate the new Green Deal. Yeah. If I saw someone on Twitter say I hate the new Green Deal, not only would I assume they're a climate change denier, I'd be like, oh, this fucking hillbilly who probably thinks Jesus is going to fix everything. Right. He probably hates AOC because he hates women and he's got a tiny dick. And I would just be like, I'd be such an asshole right away. Yeah. Because I said, why? He goes, well, I read it, and I read a bunch of scientific stuff, scientific papers. I read scientific papers all day long, which I would have had no idea. And same thing. He said there's a bunch of stuff that's a little bit off. With that said, he goes, I think America should be the number one the number one resource when it comes to alternative fuel, because I want America to be number one. What does a lefty environmentalist want? They want us to use our resources to come up with alternative fuel sources. So because we kept the conversation going, not only did I find out, okay, extreme left's a little off, extreme right's a little off, but we have the same fucking goal. Yeah. Right? I don't care if he wants to do it because he wants an American flag that's like, fuck you, China, we have solar or whatever. Don't care. Right. And I want to do it because I think the world's going to end because of climate change, right? We want it for different reasons. But just because we kept talking for 5 more minutes, I didn't assume he was like a sexist Jesus freak, and he didn't assume I was like a dumb, uneducated liberal. Yeah, exactly. We have literally the exact same goal.
Yeah, you found that common ground by just digging in a little bit deeper and trying to see it from his side.
Making room for nuance. Yeah. All right, it looks like we have a bunch more questions here today, Jamie, and we're going to answer some of these here. How do you deal with a friend who says your political beliefs are ruining the country? How should loved ones reconcile conflicting beliefs? What's the best way to discuss life's most controversial topics, like abortion? We'll be talking about that. How do you deal with someone who annoys you? And we've got several more questions. Also, Jamie, you had this tweet. I want to talk to you about this tweet where you said, I was hoping my fear, anxiety, and depression would fight it out and leave me to deal with only one, but they appear to have joined forces to destroy me.
Yep, that did happen.
We are going to be talking about all of that. And if you want to hear all of that, you can listen to this week's Maximal episode, available exclusively on Patreon. That's right. You're currently listening to our weekly Minimal episode, but each week Ryan and I record an entirely different, much longer Maximal episode on the Minimalists private podcast, which gives us the private space we need to talk about topics we don't usually discuss in public. Plus, Patreon is the best way for us to fund this podcast and keep it 100% advertisement free. When you subscribe to the Minimalist private podcast on Patreon, you'll also receive a personal link so that our Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. Find all the details and all the good stuff over at theminimalists.com/support. Ryan, what else you got for us this week?
Man, as always, being informed is more important than ever these days. I mean, talking about how we put ourselves in these bubbles. In fact, we did a podcast a while back about being in our own bubble in Missoula, this liberal haven in Montana.
Yeah.
And it's like, when I did that, Trump gets elected, and I was totally aloof to like what was going on outside of my bubble.
Me too. I was in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I was like, what?
Like, wait, what just happened?
Yep.
But here's the thing though, is like that experience helped me to appreciate that I need to read more and get informed, to look at all sides so I'm not stuck in this bubble. Also here, I've got some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners. Check them out.
Hi, I'm Grace from the Bay Area, and I just wanted to make a comment on your sustainable living episode. So I started my minimalism sustainability journey a year ago as a sophomore in high school, and recently I've actually realized that making my own beauty products has made a positive impact on my life and my self-care routine. Everything is natural, and it also builds a nice relationship because it takes more time and you'll use less products that are maybe not useful in your routine.
Hi, my name is Lori. I'm from the Chicago area. I wasn't able to come to the event in Chicago, but I did listen to the podcast of it. And I come from a long line of hoarders, even though I don't struggle with accumulating stuff myself. And I wanted to talk to the woman who had said she was having trouble getting rid of things because she didn't have a car. One thing I've noticed is that many times people who struggle with too many possessions have plans, specific plans for those items. You know, you might hear someone say, I can't get rid of those doilies because I'm giving them to Aunt Sally, or, you know, I'm keeping the paper towel tubes because I'm going to bring them to the local preschool for crafts. But that day never comes, and you just keep holding on to it. A side note here is that we often make plans for our things, not just to hold on to them longer, but because we attribute more value to those items than they actually have. But that would be a whole other comment. So for people who struggle with stuff, I just recommend being really honest with yourself about the plans you have for those items. They may sound altruistic, but it may just be like a veiled way of excusing yourself to continue to keep those items. So I recommend just pack it all up, donate it all to Goodwill or the Salvation Army, or have somebody come and pick it up. And whoever's meant to have those items will find them, and you can just let go of that responsibility of feeling like you need to find the perfect home for it, and then you won't be able to use logistics or lack of time as an excuse to hold on to things.
All right, y'all. Thanks again to Jamie Kilstein for joining us today. Jamie, I want to encourage folks to listen to your daily podcast, The Jamie Kilstein Show.
Yep. Jamie Kilstein Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify for free. We're also at Patreon. If you guys liked what I said at all, and we also talk about like mental health and stuff like that, but the podcast is daily. It's short. It's covering stories the way I talked about them today, and you'll definitely hear it on your guys' Patreon episode when we talk about the more controversial issues. It would be a lot easier. Every time I've asked like my famous friends, how do you make more money, get more listeners? They're like, start fights. And literally they've told me like, start fights on Twitter. Everyone will want to back you up. Yeah. If I was a screaming lefty or a screaming conservative who used to be a lefty, it is a lot easier to make money that way, especially under Trump, especially being so divided as we are. When I told my agent I want to do a podcast about nuance and conversation, he essentially looked at me like, go fuck yourself. But I think it's really important, and the people who have found the podcast, like I said, conservatives write in all the time, but we also have like 18-year-old LGBT punk kids who listen to the show, and they're talking to each other, and they're becoming friends, and it's a really cool community that like literally our fans have helped other fans like who have been suicidal. Like we're building something cool that's not as sexy to pitch as screaming and yelling, and I love your show and what you guys stand for, and your show literally saved my life when it comes to the move. When it came to a lot of stuff that I was doing incorrectly in my life. And so I think a lot of your audience will like it. I hope they check it out or at least say hey to me. And I love what you guys do so much and appreciate this.
Thanks, I'm man. Definitely
we appreciate you, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
Love you, brother. Right here, right now, this is where we talk about one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. We just put this essay out on our website called How Much Is Enough? And this is a question that Ryan and I have been trying to tackle over the last month or 2 months, 3 months. We've seen significant growth on our Patreon side, and you and I have actually had conversations about enough and like what a minimum viable audience is. I'm just going to read an excerpt from this, but you can find it at theminimalists.com/enough. How much is enough? Without asking this question, we blindly pursue excess. We have been acculturated to act rapaciously, acquire, consume, indulge. More, more, more. How much is enough? Without an answer, we don't know how to proceed because we don't know when to stop. Mindless desire takes us by the hand. Of course, enough is different for each of us. Enough changes as our needs and circumstances change. Your enough may include a sofa, coffee table, and TV, a dining table that seats 6, a 3-bedroom home, a 2-car garage, a backyard trampoline. Or that might be too much. Enough changes over time. Yesterday's enough may be too much today. How much is enough? Less than enough is depriving. More than enough is indulging. Enough is the sweet spot in the middle, the place where intentionality intersects with contentment, where lust doesn't get in the way of creating something meaningful. The essay goes on to talk about how Ryan and I recently capped our Patreon audience at 6,000 people. So we're done at 6,000. We're not at 6,000 yet, but we've seen it over the last 3 or 4 months just double in size. Whoa. And what we're realizing is like, okay, we're not just trying to grow for the sake of growing. Seth Godin has this thing, which I sent to you, about the minimum viable audience. And Kevin Kelly has this thing about the 1,000 true fans. Mm-hmm. And what we're realizing is this podcast is free and accessible and advertisement free to anyone who wants to listen to it. But there are sometimes we want to go deeper and talk about things that we don't normally talk about in public. And so we want to cap that because I don't want that to continue to necessarily grow. But I want it to be a group of people who understand us, where we feel the freedom to not be judged or criticized unnecessarily. Now, you can give us feedback.
That's
in fact,
so cool.
We appreciate the feedback, right? Mm-hmm. And so we figured out what enough is for us. Just like when we started dealing with consumerism in our lives, we figured out what was enough stuff. And that enough has changed over time. Now that I have a family, enough is different. Now I live in California, enough is different for me. And so that continues to change. And for me and Ryan, we figured out, like, yeah, we could rocket past 6,000 people, but could is not a good reason to do anything. And so you can check that out at theminimalists.com/enough. If you have a question, comment, or minimalism tip for our podcast, leave us a voicemail, 406-219-7839, or send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. You can comment on this episode at youtube.com/theminimalists. If you want our show notes in your inbox, sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.com, and you'll also receive our Simple Sunday emails each week. For our added value this week, this is like perfectly on topic, I think, since we're talking about finding common ground and being triggered by other people on social media, right?
Yeah, I was that person, sorry.
There's this song that, and by the way, being triggered by people we love, it's so easy to be triggered by those people, right? Well, there's this song with like this beautiful melody that creates this strange but beautiful dissonance with the anger that are in the lyrics. There's a singer, Janae Aiko. I'm not sure you're familiar with her, but she has this song called Triggered. And it's a beautiful song, but when you listen to the lyrics, you're like, oh, there is this dissonance here. And I think that in a way, that's how all relationships work. They're difficult, they're beautiful, they're filled with emotion. And of course, we get to choose what emotions we let in ultimately, or what emotions we let linger.
Amen.
So let's listen to Triggered by Janae Aiko. And if you leave here today with just one message, we hope it's this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.